Okay, I'm really excited, and I'm excited that so many of you are ready to cook. May just inspired a lot of confidence in me that this is a very doable thing.
So doable.
So I'm really
And
excited.
also so fun with kids. So I'm glad everyone, who's said that they're cooking with their kids, whether you do it now or I kind of just set you up so you can do it later at a time where, maybe things are a little more chill in your life. There's lots of options.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you really quickly about Slow Food, and then I'm going to turn this over to May. This is Slow Food Live. We started Slow Food Live when stay-at-home orders started coming in, so we could bring slow food into your home. And we are lucky enough to have this network of professionals and experts in all things food and beverage to bring onto this show and share their skills with you. It's been fantastic to have everybody in here learning with us and kind of leaning into slow food from home. So we're loving this. If you're not familiar with slow food is an international grassroots movement. It began in Italy 30 years ago. We champion and support good, clean, and fair food for all, and all the many layers and dimensions of that, of which obviously there are many. So today we're so excited to have Mei Li on here to teach us how to make dumplings. We've partnered with Roost Books to bring an author on every Wednesday. Authors of the Roost Books, fantastic publications. Please take a moment to head over to their website. I'll put a link in here. They're offering 20% off all their books with the code SLOWFOOD, including May's book, which is called Double Awesome Chinese Food, maybe one of my favorite cookbook titles ever. And I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you, May, to tell us more about your book and more about you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Roost Books for working with us on this. This has been a delight. And I will turn it over to you from here. If you have questions during the session, to those of you who are watching on Zoom, please open that little Q&A box in your window and put your questions in there. And when May is done showing us how to make dumplings, we'll get back to those questions at the end of the session. Thanks so much for being here, May.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here, and I hope that all of you will leave this live seminar with some really solid dumpling making skills. And please put any questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them throughout and also at the end. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to learn how to make dumplings from scratch, which means making your own dough. It is basically the simplest dough you can possibly imagine, and how to roll out and fold these dumplings, and also how to make a really simple filling with ingredients that a lot of you might have in your pantry right now. So I'm going to start by just showing you guys, this is the hot water dough that we're making for my book. So Mei is the name of my restaurant up in Boston, which is now run by my sister over here. It means little sister in Chinese. We are the two little sisters of our restaurant. Our older brother, Andy, was also involved in starting it with us. And we've always loved making and eating dumplings as a family. So we had to include that in our cookbook. And also we started as a food truck and then moved to running a restaurant together. And handmade dumplings have been a part of that from the very beginning. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys. And this is a recipe that I loved making as a little kid. And people ask if our mom, pictured here, taught us how to cook. And she was a full-time doctor and basically taught us nothing about cooking except how to make these dumplings. And so it's a really fun and very forgiving dough to make with kids. So I have some here that I made earlier because if you can, it's nice to give it a rest for a little while. It makes the dough a little bit easier to work with. But I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch right now. So just some regular all-purpose flour here, and it takes 2 cups of flour to approximately 3/4 of a cup of hot water. So this is called a hot water dough, and it is basically flour, water, and a pinch of salt. So easy. So 2 cups of flour, pinch of salt, and some very hot water. So stepping back to get my kettle, what you want to do is bring water to the boil and then let it cool down for a little bit. And if you are cooking with kids, this is the time where the parent sous chef should be in charge. But once the dough cools down a little bit, it's great to get kids involved. My daughter is 4 years old. She loves making dumplings. It is possible you will see her. She's watching a movie right now, but if you see any children come in, she and her cousins are here. And they all love making dumplings, even if it's just, folding in half and then sealing It's totally kid-friendly. I went to her preschool and did it with her preschool classmates who are ages 3 to 6. So if they can do it, I have faith that all of you can do it and do either a very basic fold or a super complex one, which I'll show you towards the end. So you have got your 2 cups of flour, pinch of salt, and hot water that's been let to cool just a few minutes. So I usually start with 3/4 of a cup. I tell you to boil a whole cup because you might need the whole thing. And if you need more, you can always put in a teaspoon as you go. But the idea is to get the flour mixed in with the water and pick up all the flour at the bottom of the bowl. So this is where you want to start with a wooden spoon because it's going to be really hot. And you just kind of pour your water in while stirring and keep going until the dough kind of comes together at the bottom of your bowl. So I'll try to let you guys see this, but what I do is start with a wooden spoon until everything comes together. And if you've got tons of flour at the bottom, add another teaspoon of hot water. If you find everything's coming together easily and then in fact is too sticky, then you can add a bit more flour as you need. But you'll see here, I'll try to tip this over so you can see. It's all coming together pretty well. There's not a lot of flour sticking to the bottom. And at this point, touch it, see how hot it is. You should be able to get in there with your hands and pick up the flour at the bottom of the bowl. So I'll turn this so you guys can see it, but now that I've gotten in there with my hands, I've basically gotten all the flour out. And that means that's a pretty good place to be. And I love this because you don't need yeast, you don't need to get complicated. It's basically now 3 minutes of kneading, if that. And so I like to prepare a floured surface, just lightly floured, and you're just gonna kind of casually knead it for a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, put on your favorite song, and just kind of smooth that out. And you will see that we're aiming for a dough that kind of, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but this is what we're aiming for. We had a family friend, a Chinese family friend named Linda, who used to cook with our family, and she would say it should be soft like a baby's pigu, which means soft like a baby's bum. So we're aiming for that. And Giselle, if you have anyone who has a question about this process, please let me know.
Yeah, 2 questions. One, can I use whole wheat pastry flour or another type of flour? And if so, are there any others that you would recommend?
Yes, so we definitely do whole wheat flours, but I'd recommend starting with maybe half. And depending on what flours you have, I have actually substituted like a gluten-free flour replacement, 1-to-1. I think I used Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 replacement. It's definitely not the same texture, but it's nice for if you have family or friends that are gluten-free to be able to do that. And so maybe start with half of whole wheat flour, and then you can pretty much work with it the same way.
Excellent. And would you recommend maybe the first batch, like sticking to the AP so you can get a feel for it?
Yes, I think it's always helpful. Despite being mostly someone who does not follow recipes when it comes to doughs and baking, it's always nice to just start with AP just so you get a feel for it, and then you can see. I think I actually made one with a full whole wheat flour once, but again, it's just nice to kind of know what you're going for and the texture of the dough when you're starting with regular all-purpose flour.
Excellent. And would we adjust the water at all if we change the type of flour we're using? Of the amount?
That's a good question. I mean, this is called a hot water dough, that it makes it like a very short and easy to cut dough. I think that what you want to do is always just be ready to adjust as necessary. So same with even the regular one, I always have some extra hot water necessary. Sometimes you need a little spoonful. Sometimes you need to add a lot of flour to get it to the consistency that you like. But another thing I should mention, which I think is quite important, is that you can also buy ready-made dumpling wrappers, and they're super easy to work with. We like a brand called Twin Marquee, and they're available at a lot of Asian grocery stores. You can buy them, you can freeze them. I usually have some in my cupboard because Sometimes it's nice to make dough from scratch, and sometimes it's nice to just have it ready, and it's good to have those options. So the idea is we will go through the whole process of how to cut it and roll it and fold it, and that's really nice to do from scratch, and also kids really like to play with dough. But if you ever just feel like making a lot of dumplings, then it's nice to have the option of pre-made ones.
Excellent, perfect. Can you tell us one more time the ratio, 2 cups of flour to how much water?
Yes, so I always say 2 cups of flour to 1 cup of boiled and then cooled hot water. But to start by only pouring 3/4 of a cup. So
Okay.
it's essentially 2 cups of flour to 3/4 of a cup very hot water, but give yourself a little extra just in case it needs it. And once you've got this dough ball, what you want to do is put it in a bowl, cover it with a damp cloth, and let it rest for about 30 minutes. And that gives the gluten a little time to relax, and it'll be a little easier to work with. You can also refrigerate the dough if you're not going to work with it right away. Just when you are ready to make your dumplings, pull it out of the fridge, get it to room temperature, and it'll be much easier to work with. So now I'm going to take this dough that I made earlier, and I am going to shape it and cut it up and show you guys how to roll it out. So what I want to do actually is show you this page from my book that I really wanted in here to give you guys a sense of the process, just because of the angle of the camera might be hard for you to see. So what we're going to do is chop the dough into 4 pieces and then roll it out. And when I was little, I grew up calling this the snake. Also, I should mention, this dough is great for scallion pancakes, which involves snakes and snails. This one, you really just have the snake part, but you roll it into a cylinder, and then you use one of my favorite tools called a bench scraper or a dough cutter, but you can also just use a knife, and you cut it into these short cylinders, I guess you could call it. And then you turn them onto their side. This is gonna sound like a lot right now, but I'll talk you guys through it as we go. And then you roll them out into these little flat dumpling wrappers. And then I'll show you how to do some different folds, but that's basically the idea. And it sounds complicated, I know, at the beginning, but I'll show you guys it's totally not that hard. So, trusty bench scraper, one of my favorite tools, because number one, you're getting flour all over your counter. Makes it really easy to just pick everything up and clean it, especially if the flour has stuck to your counter. I also love it for when you're chopping vegetables. You can just scoop them up, put them in the pan, and not have to, wedge under your super sharp knife. Dangerous. Let's avoid that. So, dough cutter, bench scraper. I'm gonna chop the dough into 4 equal pieces, roughly. And actually, this is a good time to put them back under that damp cloth, because you don't want to let them dry out too much. Oh, and I should mention, if you're going to put it in the fridge overnight, it's best if it's wrapped in plastic, maybe sprayed with a little oil so it doesn't stick, and that way it doesn't dry out. So we've got this 1/4 piece of dough, and we're going to roll it out into our snake tube. I'm just going to grab some flour so it doesn't stick. You can kind of get used to how much flour you think it needs. I usually just like to keep a light coating on the cutting board, and that keeps it from sticking. And so you can see I've got this tube. Let's see if you can see this here. I'm going to use my bench scraper to cut it into 6 equal pieces. So cut it in half, and then two cuts there makes for 6. You can kind of see these little cute dough lumps. And the idea is that they're kind of rounded, so when you turn them on their side and you squish them with your palm, then you have a little round circle. I hold them up against my darker apron, and you can see how they're these little round dough circles. So you turn them all on the end and flatten. So now I have 6 relatively equal, it's okay if they're not, flattened dough circles like this. All right, and so you can totally use a regular rolling pin here, but the Chinese style is to use these these very short handleless rolling pins called dowels. I have like a fancy one, and I have one that I'm pretty sure was $1 or $2 at a Chinese market. And I have also gone to the hardware store and bought one of these and sanded them down and made 6 dowels for $2 or something like that. So they're really inexpensive and great to have around. And you're going to take these cute little dough pillows, and what you do, I hope you can see decently well, is, so there's a number of ways to do this. I like to just go around in a circle with my hands, turning and rotating the dough circle and flattening with the dowel as I go around in order to get a little flat pancake. So, woo! That's what that ends up looking like. And it's okay to have it be a little thicker in the middle and a little thinner on the edges, because that makes it easier to fold. And you can also, if you have just a regular rolling pin, just roll straight over, rotate, roll, rotate, and then you have these pancakes. So I know that seems like a lot. Giselle, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them or do my best to while I roll out the rest of these. If you're finding that they're sticking, you can just add a little bit more flour and go from there.
Yeah, Susie is wondering, it's beautiful. I think that it's okay if your dough's not a perfect circle, right?
Yes, 100%.
You're clearly very proficient at making that a good circle. About how many inches across when you roll it out are you going for?
So, as you can see, despite having done this for 30 years of my life, they're totally different sizes. That's totally fine.
Okay.
I would say 3 inches.
Mm-hmm.
3 inches. I probably said a specific number in my cookbook. I'm the type of cook who nothing turns out the same every time, but that's okay. It's also one of the things we say a lot is that your dumplings do not have to be beautiful. They will taste good, and that's what matters. You can have these really wonky dumplings. It's totally fine. They're delicious. And also, you know, it's kind of circle. It's kind of like a shield shape, but the nice thing is that when you fold them, you can mess around with as you fold them to kind of nudge little weird bits into shape, and it's going to be totally fine.
Perfect. So you're looking a little more for the thickness of it than the size of it?
Oh, the thickness, yes. Let me see if I can turn this to the side.
No, I mean, you answered the question I asked, but I wonder if that's what you're kind of feeling for, is a certain thickness.
Maybe like a millimeter or 2. I probably said it in my book exactly how much. So let's see if I can listen to my own advice here.
Well, it's helpful to see. I think it's good.
Okay, so here's what I said. 2 to 3 millimeters thick and about 3 inches in diameter.
Perfect.
So I also said in my book that this is meant to make 24 dumplings because each of these quarter balls of dough makes 6 dumplings. But then I also realized that I like smaller dumplings sometimes, so sometimes I'll cut it into 8 pieces. So again, clearly I'm not even listening to my own advice, so you should just do you. It's all good.
It's a testament to following your own instincts.
Exactly. And so, you know, I'm going to say that that's probably 2 millimeters, but it's up to you. Do you like a thick dumpling? Some people like a really thick dumpling. Some people like a really thin dumpling. So again, you know, you can kind of go as far as you like. You can also, you know, play around with it as you find out which fold is easiest for you. Also, are you aiming for like a complicated, beautiful fold, or are you just trying to make as many dumplings as you can, as fast as you can? You'll figure out what's kind of working for you. Excellent. And also, you might find sometimes that a dough is stickier than another time. And then just add more flour. I'm right now having a little bit of sticking onto my rolling pin, and you know, it happens. I'm gonna just flour it up a little bit, and then ideally you'll have less sticking.
Perfect. I'm gonna squeeze in a couple more questions, which is, it's okay if there's flour everywhere, you're getting a little extra on your dough, and that's okay.
Totally. And I'll show you if your So basically, when you buy dumpling wrappers from a market, they've been stacked up and they've got flour layered between them so they don't stick. So if that's the case, what I usually do is get a little bowl of water, and then you can dip your finger into it and then moisten the edges. And that helps particularly when you have pre-made dumpling wrappers. But you might also find that you really floured up the ones that you were making by hand. And in that case, you can also do the same thing, and you just dot water around the circumference of your wrapper, and that'll also help it stick when you close.
Okay, excellent. And for the folks who are making the dough along with you, just to confirm that this is correct, you've left the dough out of the fridge on the countertop for about 30 minutes covered with a damp cloth.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you can leave it for an hour, 2, 3, you know, until you're ready to cook it. But I wouldn't leave it for many, many hours. And if you're going overnight, into the fridge. So now that I have 6 somewhat equal, but definitely not completely equal or completely round dumpling wrappers, I'm going to show you guys a couple of different folds. Oh, and I'm also going to show you how to make a dumpling that we serve in our restaurant. It's kind of a version of it because I didn't have all the ingredients. And again, this is very much how I cook, is using what you have. And I will just mention that my side project, now that I'm not running a restaurant, which my sister is running, is it's called Food Waste Feast. And the idea is to help you use up what you have instead of cooking for less food waste and less running out to the grocery store, which is more and more important these days. And so that's why it's nice to be flexible with what you have. And so I am not following my own recipe, which is for Three Sisters Dumplings, which is a vegan dumpling that we make in our restaurant. And Three Sisters is named after a practice of growing together squash, corn, and beans. Let me actually show you guys briefly. This is the recipe here. I will show you guys how to do these beautiful pleated dumplings at the end. And it's named for this indigenous agricultural tradition of growing corn, beans, and squash together, primarily known from the Haudenosaunee Iroquois nations. My sister wrote this, so that's why she is the one who knows all about growing and farming. And I didn't have any butternut squash, so I'm using sweet potatoes. And I am also using frozen corn and canned black beans. If you have all those ingredients fresh, awesome. If they're frozen and canned, that's awesome too. I'll read to you guys, in case anyone wants to write down approximately how much of everything that is. It's about a cup of cooked butternut squash or sweet potato, or whatever you like. 3/4 a cup of cooked black beans, and 3/4 a cup of corn kernels. So you can substitute anything you like. I'm all about that. You can switch out for a different bean. You can use a different root vegetable. You do you. It won't be exactly a Three Sisters dumpling, but I'm sure it will be delicious. And other than that, you want, in my recipe, it says thyme sprigs. I don't have them. I'm leaving them out. 2 minced cloves of garlic and a pinch of salt and some olive oil. The actual recipe, 2 tablespoons. I'm just going to go like that. And stir it all together, taste it, see what you think. We also have an actual sweet potato recipe, recipe for a sweet potato dumpling with feta and brown butter. So if you want to kind of mix the 2 recipes, you could put in some cheese. If you ever pick up our book, you will notice that we do not stick to tradition at all when it comes to dumpling making. We have multiple dumplings with cheese, which is not a traditional Chinese ingredient, but it is a delicious one. We joke that the food at our restaurant is Chinese food with cheese. And I would say that that is an accurate description of many of the things that we make. So the recipe is flexible. That's another thing that I love for thinking about food waste, is that if you've got a little bit of X, Y, or Z in your fridge that you think would be delicious, just pop it in. It makes a delicious dumpling. This is a very simple recipe. Sorry, I use the bowl that I mix my flour in, but you can see that it is just kind of a mix of veggies. This one's vegan, but again, add whatever you like. And now I'll show you guys how to fold some of those dumplings. So one of the things to know when you are making dumplings for the first time is that you get really excited about stuffing the dumpling full of delicious filling. It's very tempting, but try to avoid it because it makes it harder to fold the dumplings. So I usually try to aim for about a tablespoon, roughly. And you can see here that the easiest of all folds is just a half moon. Fold it in half, pinch close the edges. This is my 4-year-old daughter's favorite fold because she can do it very easily. And you just pinch it closed. There you go, simple. And the nice thing about that is that once you've mastered that, which I'm sure you'll have no problem with, you can bring the edges together and make kind of a tortellini ravioli dumpling. Super simple. Let's see. We'll do that again. Wrapper, about a tablespoon of filling. I actually usually don't use tablespoon measures because they get stuck. But again, put it in the center. You've got lots of space on the edges. Fold it closed. And if you are having trouble getting the edges to stay closed, dot a little water around the edge and that will help it stick together better. But as you can see, we've got this half moon. And again, if you want to, you can just fold the edges together and make this little tortellini. My daughter also calls it a belly button. So tortellini belly button. We've got 2 dumplings there. And that is the most simple and easiest way, especially if you're looking to just get a bunch of dumplings cooked because you have a whole bunch of filling to use up. You know, keep it simple. It's all good. It will still taste delicious. But I will also show you guys some other folds, like this is kind of a tri-cornered hat or a pyramid. And what you do is you take your hands like this and you fold it together. So you've got this kind of like a Hamantaschen. You have this little pyramid that you then pinch closed. And one thing I most definitely want to say is that you should go wild and make whatever shapes you like. We've been teaching dumpling classes at our restaurant for a while, and actually I do want to mention that you can still do those. You can sign up for online dumpling classes. The chefs from our restaurant are running classes, which can either be public classes where you just join in on a call like this, or also private classes. So let's say you want to do a class with your mom and your sister and your family members who are all in different places, then you can have a private family class. So go to meimeiboston.com, MEIMEI, I think there's info there, or reach out to us and we can tell you more info. But what the point I was trying to get to is that we do lots of dumpling classes, and every time I'm amazed to see a different fold that I've never seen before, because someone's just sitting there playing around and the dumplings taste good no matter what. It's not about, you know, how fancy they are. They're gonna taste good in tons of different shapes. So you should have fun with it. And especially if you've got kids around, you guys should have fun with it. So that's a little tri-cornered hat where one of the triangle pieces is like half the length of the other ones, but you know what? It's still gonna be delicious. So, boop. And then you can also do that with 4 sides instead of 3. And there's lots of different options. So while I have 2 left, I'm going to show you guys the classic dumpling pleat, which was the one in this picture. And I'm going to help myself by taking a little bit of filling out, because again, you don't want to overstuff. And this is that classic Chinese restaurant dumpling pleat. I'm gonna come over here and show it to you guys because we found in our dumpling classes that it's nice to be able to see the person's hands. Otherwise it can be hard to follow. So hopefully you guys will be able to see this. And also, again, this is a fold that there are many ways to do it. I'm gonna show you guys the one in the picture and then I'll show you another variation. But you've got your dumpling wrapper. You've got about a tablespoon of filling in the center, not overfilled. And I fold it up like a taco, like a hard taco. And I pinch forward one side. And then the idea is that you're making a pleat with the top layer, that's this side, while leaving this bottom side of the dumpling flat. So you make this pleat and it gets pinched onto the top. Again, form a pleat, pinch it to the top. If you need to, as I do, especially at this awkward angle, you just tuck the filling back in there with your other finger. Form a pleat, pinch it closed. Make a pleat on the top, pinch it closed. Tuck that filling in there trying to escape, make a pleat, pinch it closed. And then you've got this kind of classic Chinese dumpling shape. It's okay if it's a little fat. It's okay if there's a tiny hole there. You can just pinch it closed. And there you go. And I will show you guys that again in a slight variation. My sister and I teach these dumpling classes together, and then we find that both of us are doing our dumplings in a totally different manner, which is totally fine. There's so many different ways to do it. So we've got our wrapper there. Make it into a little hard taco shell shape. And you can then also start by pinching the middle shut. And then you just make a pleat on each side. So one there, pinch it closed. If there's extra space, you can make a second pleat, but depending on how much you have, you may not be able to fit it. So that's two pleats on one side going towards the center. Then on this side, I'm also going to make another pleat. Pinch it to the center. Last pleat, pinch to the center. So again, little dumpling. I pinched this one in the center first and had pleats going to the inner sides, going to the inside, and the other one I started on one side and just went all the way across. This takes practice, but you can totally do it. These ones are, you know, kind of particularly ugly. That's okay. They're still going to taste good. So, Giselle, I would love to answer any other questions and talk you guys through it, and maybe can show you how to also cook these dumplings if we've got time.
Great, excellent. I love seeing, thank you for coming close to the camera. It's really helpful to see how you're folding that. I can't wait to try it. A couple questions. So I'm going to take us back to you making the dough. Are you using a particular kind of salt or does it matter?
No, I cook with Diamond Crystal brand kosher salt, which I particularly love. It is not as salty as Morton kosher salt, but I also just pinch with my fingers and drop it in. So I rarely measure salt.
Perfect. And then someone is asking about some questions on the filling. So would you add, are there any spices you like to add, or do you like to keep it just to the flavors of those 3 ingredients or whatever you're putting in it? If I used cooked beans, or if I used canned beans, excuse me, would I cook them first? And how are you preparing the potato or the squash? You boil it, do you mash it? Do you...
Great question. So in our cookbook, I take a whole butternut squash, cut it in half, and I roast it with a little bit of water and olive oil in the pan. And then I take a cup of it and use it for the filling, and I use the rest of it for other uses. This one is made with sweet potatoes that I put into a cold oven and turned to 400 and just baked for about an hour. So honestly, you can just do it any way you like. You can roast it, you can boil it, you can steam it, totally up to you. This is canned beans, which I just cracked open, rinsed, and used straight from the can. But you can also use cooked beans that you've cooked yourself. And then I kind of forgot the first question already.
Did it? I think, oh, spices, if there are any spices.
Spices, yeah. Honestly, it's totally up to you. This one we keep very simple, thyme and garlic. But it would be good with cumin or coriander or turmeric. You could make it a curry spiced dumpling. That would be delicious. Again, I'm very flexible when it comes to mixing and matching things. If you think it would taste good, go for it.
Cool, great. And so you're looking and cooking the ingredients you're putting in it. You're looking for a little bit of moisture so it holds together. Is that true?
Yes. So I did olive oil, like mixed together. You basically want it scoopable, but not so wet that there is liquid dripping out when you try to put it onto your dumpling.
Perfect. Excellent. And I know somebody had a question about the fold, so I'm going to find it here. Thank you for your questions. With the tripod folds, does the top get cooked the same as the bottom? Well, you're going to show us the cooking in a minute, so you might get to that.
Well, I'll actually talk about that now. So what we do for dumplings, there are lots of ways to cook this. You can steam them. At the restaurant, we deep fry them a lot. It's delicious. But we do a pan-sear steam combination. So it's going to be hard for you guys to see, but I have a pan here. It's non-stick, but you don't need it to be. You can use cast iron. But if you don't want it to stick, it's nice to have. Medium, high heat, enough oil at the bottom, a neutral oil that it's unlikely to stick. And what you're going to do is you're going to put your dumplings straight in and let them cook so that you get a nice crunchy brown sear on the bottom. So I'm just going to pop my dumplings in. We'll see how well I can achieve this while also looking at the camera, but it is also a pretty forgiving method where you are frying them and also steaming them. So the idea is you've got oil at the bottom of the pan, that's neutral oil, and it cooks the dumplings enough so you get a nice crispy brown crunchy sear at the bottom. Then you pour in, I would say, I think I say a quarter cup of water, but I never measure it. The idea is to add enough water to the pan that it creates steam, and that steam is cooking the tops of the dumplings. So you want to do this carefully because you are adding water to hot oil, and that's why you don't want tons of oil at the bottom. You want just like a nice covering. And have a pan which you have a lid for. I have like a splatter guard which I'm using, so it doesn't need to be completely sealed tight or anything. The idea is to just get enough coverage on the pan that the steam doesn't escape. That cooks the top of the dumplings. Then once all the water has evaporated, you let the oil crisp the dumplings back up again. And that way you have what you have probably tried in a Chinese restaurant, which is a combination of the steamed top and the crunchy bottom, which is like what we're going for. So you can actually even just pick up the dumplings, or if you feel comfortable. This is getting there. Got to see a little brown sear there. But you're aiming for kind of a darker brown, I would say. Here's one. Brown sear. You can go darker if you want to. And then I will show you guys. Be careful, water, cover, stand back, don't stick your face right in there. Pour the water in, about a half cup, and then cover. And the idea is for the dumplings to steam up while they're searing at the bottom. And I have exact amounts or times written in my book, but I just do it by instinct. So maybe 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. And another thing I should say, if you're making a bunch of dumplings and you don't plan to cook them right away, the best thing to do is line them up so they don't touch on a sheet pan or a plate, and stick them right in the freezer. If they sit around for a while, even these ones that I let sit while talking to you, they can get a little soggy, they will stick together, and the idea is to put them right in the freezer. Once they've frozen through and are hard, you take them off the sheet pan, then you can transfer them into a freezer bag or plastic bag. And then when you're ready to eat them, you cook them right from frozen. So you will do the exact same method that I have said now, which is putting them straight into a hot pan, into a pan with a hot oil, and let them crisp up at the bottom, pour the water on top to steam, but just give it longer, an extra 3-4 minutes. And the idea is to, again, let the bottoms crisp up, let the steam cook the tops of the dumplings. You can always just lift up the lid to your pan and check. And then once the tops are cooked, if there's any extra water, you just take the top off and let it evaporate, and then the bottoms will crisp up again. So it takes a little finessing, not super complicated, but you just have to do it a couple times to get the hang of it. And as long as everything is cooked, especially what's nice is if you're doing a vegetarian dumpling, you don't have to worry about cooking raw meat. But if it is a dumpling with meat in it that is raw, then use a thermometer or break it open, just make sure that your meat's cooked. But the idea, you'll see how you have, it'll go from a kind of opaque, it's a little easier to see when your dumpling is thinner or if you use a pre-made wrapper, but it gets a little translucent once it's cooked through, and it's no longer this opaque, thick white dough. I hope that helps. I know it sounds like a lot.
Definitely helps. No, I think that combination of that crispy bottom, and that's such a nice texture. It's great to know how to do it. Helen is wondering, maybe with a different type of fold, maybe perhaps the pleated one, are you browning both sides of the dumpling before adding the water to the pan, or just the bottom? That's
a great question. Part of it, I would say, is it's up to you. Do you like more crunchy or do you like more steamed? Often, if I have a pre-made wrapper, you'll find that the edges have gotten really dry because they've been sitting, in storage. And then the outside, I like to turn them over and crisp the top. So that way, anything that is dried is more crunchy, and you're like really going for the crunchy part instead of having it just be dried. And other times, I just kind of like the doughiness of a steamed wrapper. So it's really up to you. You can kind of cook it however much you want, the crunchy fried bits or the steamed bits. I'll see how they're doing and if I can show you guys some of them. I wish I could show you, but basically you have a oil and water bubbling along the bottom, and I'm just gonna let that cook for another few minutes and then hopefully show you guys what they look like. But I also, if we have 2 minutes, want to just show you guys a dipping sauce, which is another thing that I have an actual recipe for in my book, but I always just eyeball. And there's many, many ways you can do this too. There's like no one right way to do it, but I personally like soy sauce, the classic, especially for a pork dumpling, which is kind of fattier and it's nice to have some acid to cut through that. This is black vinegar. You can order this online. You can find it in any Asian grocery store. Zhenjiang or Chun-King vinegar. Basically, it's a black vinegar. You could have sriracha, sesame oil, any combination that you want. Also, my mom does not like to eat a lot of sodium, so she leaves out the soy sauce altogether, which is my favorite part personally. And she does black vinegar with a little bit of sugar water. So I basically just pour it in until I like the look of it. And then I taste it and I adjust, which is kind of how I cook in general. Put it all together, taste it, needs more chili, cool. Needs more salt, add some more soy sauce. I also like to smash a piece of garlic and put that in. That's a nice use for your dough scraper also. Take a clove of garlic, put it down, boom, ninja smack, put the garlic in. That gives you the garlic flavor released without little bits of raw garlic ending up in your mouth. Chopped scallions I love. If you've got chili sauce of any kind, hot sauce in your fridge, put that in too. This is a place where it's nice to customize. And they're also delicious with mayonnaise. Sriracha, mayonnaise, stir it together, super delicious. I'm gonna see if I can show you guys one of these cooked dumplings. Giselle, do you have any questions while I'm finishing up?
Since you mentioned the meat filling, we have a couple curiosities about putting meat in there. And would you ever put cooked meat in there, or do you always wrap raw? You always use raw meat. And do you have any suggestions for like a ratio of lean, like meat to fat? So if it's a ground pork, for example, are you looking for something in particular?
Great question. Okay, so a traditional, in our book, we've got a recipe for what's called, I'm just gonna grab it so I can actually tell you numbers. We call it a traditional-ish pork dumpling because it is not traditional, but it's based on a traditional recipe. Because typically you would use raw pork raw ground pork with something like Chinese chives or Napa cabbage, which most people don't tend to have in their fridges. I really like to use up random bits of greens that I have around. So this is a great use for kale stems. This is a great use for, spinach. This is a great use for little bits of cabbage. It's totally up to you, and it adds a nice texture. So let's see, this recipe is 1 cup diced, tightly packed green vegetable of your choice, such as Brussels sprouts, kale stems, turnip greens, use whatever you like. And that is 1 cup to 8 ounces of ground pork. But you can, again, mix and match that, try a different meat, add in more vegetable. You can kind of go with the ratio that you like. And there was also a question about cooked meat. And yes, we've made cooked meat dumplings also. So we used to braise beef and add it to blue cheese to make these braised beef and blue cheese dumplings. You can use leftovers. This is a great use for leftovers. So I actually have really good, my husband brought home like a gallon of chili once. And we made it into chili dumplings. It's a great use of random leftovers, especially if you have something like a stew where you have made all this different meat and it's just kind of there, especially if it's, once you've refrigerated it and the stew has kind of come together a little bit, it's easy to just take a scoop of it, put it in a dumpling, not traditional, delicious. And that way you have, you've made a completely new meal out of this dish that you already had. And I'm all about using up leftovers in that way. So they're exciting and they're fun to eat in a different way, but you already had the ingredients for it put together in your fridge. Because if it was delicious as a stew, it will be delicious in a dumpling. That is my opinion. And I'm gonna grab some of these dumplings and try to show you guys. Perfect. So we have our tricorn hat dumpling, seared crispy bottom, top, and this is quite hot. Pleated dumpling. It's a little hard to show you, but crispy bottom. Pleat. You can see there. Not that hot. Okay. So they will be very hot as you take them off the pan. Don't put them in your mouth right away. It will be painful. Jill, what other questions can I answer?
That's a good recommendation.
It's always good to give me
one with the pan. Like, I want to
so
try it.
excited. I made these dumplings. Ow!
And now I can't taste the rest of the meal. Great. Let's see. We have a question on the cooking time. So 2 things. If I were to steam the dumplings, can you tell us maybe how long you would steam them for? Let's go on the Three Sisters recipe that you've showed us today.
Yeah, and then, this is another place where I will refer to my previous writing where I actually timed it.
Perfect.
Not one of my strengths. So I said, okay, quickly refer to the pan searing technique, 2 to 4 minutes until the bottoms are golden brown. If you're comfortable with it, you just pick it up, but you can also use tongs. It's generally a smart idea. If you don't have tongs, stainless ones like this, they're like robot hands. You can touch hot things. They're so useful and very inexpensive at like a restaurant supply store. 2 to 4 minutes to get a browning on the bottom, and then 4 to 6 minutes to let the steam cook the top of the dumplings, 8 to 10 minutes of cooking from frozen. And I said medium-high heat. So 2 to 4 minutes to brown, 4 to 6 to cook, 8 to 10 of cooking from frozen. I would say maybe 8 to 10 if you're steaming, but again, it'll depend on the size of the dumpling. Best to, start it at the lower end. This is how I cook everything. Start at the lower end, test it, see if it needs more time, put it on again for a minute or 2, test it, see how it goes. Just be more careful if you're cooking with raw meat, obviously.
Excellent. And then we also have some questions. I'm going to bundle these questions on the dough.
Cool.
The question is, can I freeze the dough, which I think you did mention. And
yeah, so I would say freezing the dough is, I don't typically freeze the dough. I would refrigerate the dough. I would freeze the dumplings once you've made it into a dumpling. Because it comes together really fast and will stay in the fridge for a while, but I think the texture is just much harder to work with and know how you're going to get it if it's been frozen. but make the dumplings, freeze them right away.
And this is like a perfect thing, you know, your kids need a snack. The idea of having a stack of dumplings in your freezer sounds really good to me.
It's so great. And also what's really fun is having a dumpling party where you make a bunch of dough or buy a bunch of wrappers, make a bunch of fillings, have people bring their leftovers, come over, everybody makes dumplings, they learn something fun, your kids get involved, it's great. Then you stick them in the freezer as you go, and then everyone goes home with a bag of dumplings.
So fun.
Yeah, we used to have those when I was growing up, and it's just like having a bag of dumplings in your freezer is just very, very nice.
Doubly awesome.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. And someone has asked about how you would store a stack of rolled dough. I do want to reiterate, based on your last comment, that you mentioned you want to keep the dough on the counter for 30 minutes, but it can go a little longer. So if you're like prepping for your dumpling party, you can make it an hour ahead, maybe 90 minutes.
Exactly.
And just leave it on the counter. So if I were to roll them out into the circles and wanted to stack them and store them that way, do you have recommendations on that?
Yeah, it's not something I tend to do because handmade dough just tends to be stickier. So you could layer it with parchment paper in between. You could add a dusting of flour in between. But again, it's just harder to ensure that they won't stick together, especially depending on how hot your kitchen is. If you wanted to have it easy for people, I would try to buy pre-made wrappers, which are at a lot of regular supermarkets nowadays. Not only Asian supermarkets. Asian supermarkets will have like 18 kinds in different colors and different thicknesses. But usually in the refrigerated section, like where you would find often tofu or salad dressings in the produce section, you'll find pre-made dumpling wrappers. And then if I were having people over to cook dumplings and make the handmade ones, then it's fun to let people roll out their own, because it's usually like a fun dough making, kind of get messy, get your hands in there kind of thing.
Perfect. And what I'm hearing from you is your strongest recommendation is make the dumplings and put them in the freezer.
Yes.
Folded and made.
Yes. If you missed this part, a sheet pan is great. Line them up kind of like they were in this picture. So if I show that to you, line them up. Oh, here's a picture. So those are those little tortellini belly button ones. The reason they are so beautiful and perfect is because those are with pre-made dumpling wrappers. So don't expect them to look like that. Same thing with oh yeah. These ones are just little ugly dumplings. You know, they're so cute. They're gonna taste delicious, but they are not shaped quite as beautifully as these ones that have the uniformity of being made by some kind of fancy dumpling making wrapper machine. So yes, put them all on a sheet pan, line them up, or a plate, let them freeze without touching, then you can scoop them all up and put them into a bag. But you don't want them touching while they freeze, otherwise they'll be totally stuck together and really hard to cook.
Perfect, thank you. And I love this question. Can you tell us the difference between a dumpling and a potsticker?
Great question. What I would say is potsticker is kind of traditionally this kind that I've showed you here, the seared and steamed technique. Dumpling, to my mind, encompasses many different kinds. So dumpling would encompass also steamed. It would encompass a soup dumpling. It would encompass all these other kinds of dumplings, these kind of dough wrapped morsels of deliciousness that can be cooked and folded in many kinds of ways. So I would say dumplings is like an overarching term, and potsticker is one particular American translation of a Chinese dish. When I grew up, they were called Peking ravioli. I don't know if anybody, I think that was a Northeast thing. I think Joyce Chen, like one of the first Chinese chefs in Boston, I think she popularized that idea, but they were called Peking ravioli on menus when I was growing up. So there's tons of different names, but a lot of ways is just, is it fried? Is it steamed? Is it round? Is it filled with soup? There's lots of different ways. But I hope that answered the question, which my mom would probably give you a better answer.
Next time.
Exactly. We'll have her next time.
Perfect. So I just want to call out that there's so much love happening for you in this chat. And our wonderful teacher and presenter, Mei. This has been fantastic. And I'd love to end on asking you a little bit about the book. And my favorite question is like, what's your favorite part of the book, or what was your favorite part to write? And do you have a favorite dumpling?
Great question. Tough one to answer. I will show you my favorite photo of the book, which I think encompasses lots about our vibe. So this, my brother and sister and I wrote this book together. We ran this restaurant together, and that's my brother Andy, me in the center, my sister Irene, and that's a totally candid photo that just explains, I think, how much fun we have together and how much fun we want cooking to be. You know, these dumplings don't have to be perfect. As you do it better and better, you will make more beautiful dumplings, but it's not what it's about. It's about having fun. It's about, you know, getting a little messy. It's about eating delicious food. And we want to share that with you guys with this book. And I hope that, you know, that came across in this seminar today, is that it's okay. You know, your first dumplings are going to be weird looking, and that's totally fine. They will taste good, and that's what matters. And that being said, my favorite dumplings are these cumin lamb dumplings here. We also do a cumin lamb shepherd's pie, which my Chinese Scottish husband is obsessed with. A mix of mashed potatoes and cumin lamb, which is a very Northwestern Chinese dish. It's kind of a great combination. And here we do it with mint yogurt. So you just take like a regular plain yogurt, add in some fresh mint and garlic and salt and maybe a little olive oil, a little lemon. You can kind of do what you want, but it's a very untraditional dumpling, like everything that we have in our book, but you know, we just love the flavors together. So cumin lamb dumpling is my favorite. And oh, I want to mention also really quickly, same dough. This is an important thing to know. The same dough that you just made, the hot water dough, also makes scallion pancakes. So as you can see here, you would take it, divide it into 4 again, make that same kind of cylinder tube snake. Then you, reverse. You roll it out into large pieces here. You roll it up into a snake, coil it up into a snail. That gives you what's called like laminated dough. It's in layers. You put in scallions, and then you roll it out again. And so once you master this dough, which is very easy and handy to have, you can make flatbreads. My friend uses it for these kind of just easy to make flatbreads, but then you can also do all this rolling and sprinkling with scallions, and you have scallion pancakes. So it's very versatile.
That's fantastic. That's like one of my favorite things. It's a good scallion pancake.
In sauce, you know,
excellent.
You want, yeah. Perfect. And that's our, the reason, I will say one last thing, Double Awesome Chinese food is called Double Awesome because of a dish that we serve at our restaurant that is a scallion pancake filled with 2 oozy eggs, a local greens pesto, and sharp cheddar cheese. And we felt that that really encompassed who we are, which is Chinese heritage. That's where the scallion pancake comes from, but also oozy eggs and cheese because we love cheese. Put it all together. It's totally random and it is totally delicious. And that dish is called a Double Awesome. And it's our, you know, how our food truck and restaurant became super popular because people love the Double Awesome, and that's how this cookbook got named. So once you have a scallion pancake, you can make all sorts of things with it. It makes delicious sandwich bread.
Excellent. And I can personally attest to the deliciousness of that dish, as I have tried it at Mei Li.
Great. I know. We just discovered that you've been to a restaurant. So
yeah.
fun.
Oh, you're putting stuff on the scallion pancakes. Dreams really do come true.
Totally.
So this is so great. I can't wait to get your book into my kitchen. It's so unique and so creative, and I love how personal it really seems to come from your own history together of cooking together. We have just reached the hour, so I want to honor your time and let you go. Thank you so much for being here today. And you're speaking my language. I'm Lebanese, and so lamb and mint yogurt, I just like running through my veins. So I can't wait to get into this and try some of these recipes.
Awesome.
Thank you all for joining us here today, and good luck with your dumplings. Please show and tell us how it went. You can tag Slow Food USA on social media, and Mei, you can let us know who.
Yes. My, so Mei Boston is our handle on Instagram and Facebook. I'm personally Mei23, MEI23. If you have any questions about your dumplings, just tag me and I will answer them. And Food Waste Feast also is my food waste, cooking creatively, using up what you have, making things delicious based on, you know, whatever random things you have around. And I hope you do that with dumplings, and send me a message and I will talk you through if you have any questions.
Perfect, fantastic. And we will follow up with all of you with an email. There will be a link to this session recorded so you can revisit when you're getting back to your dumplings at another time. We'll link to Food Waste Feast and Mei and the virtual dumplings classes if you guys want to keep learning.
And you will have these soon, and they will be delicious no matter what they look like. So
I love that. Thank you so much for inspiring confidence, for teaching us this cool new skill. Good luck with your dumplings, everyone. Please do show us and keep an eye out for that email. Mei, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really
Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. Stay in touch and send me questions. I hope you enjoy your dumplings.